Hello everyone, FPL Wrapped here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. Something slightly different today. We're starting a new series, which is a game week preview series, but more like a Q&A. So I posted on Twitter and on YouTube community asking for your questions and your dilemmas ahead of game week 5. I said they could be debates, comparisons, discussions around Wildcard, etc. And we did get a lot of questions around Wildcard. And those questions which were asked most often, all were most general and I thought could be applied to more than one manager, I've included in this video. We've got so much to discuss. So without further ado, let's just get into today's video. So, as I said in the introduction, a lot of the questions were around Wildcard. I could have made an entire video on it. I just didn't have the time this week. So the first three little sections here are based around Wildcard. Now, before you skip, if you're not wildcarding this week, this is just general Wildcard advice. So this will apply whether you're wildcarding now, game week 7, game week 8, game week 15. These are just the things I'm thinking about when I'm wildcarding myself. So a question that I got asked by sort of 5 or 6 people is, should I wildcard this week with no presentation of their team, etc.? And obviously that's very difficult for me to say because it is very, number one, team dependent, but also manager dependent. It depends if you're risk seeking, risk averse. It depends what your style is across the season. However, if I'm deciding, should I wildcard this week, there are a few things I do and a few things that I think about. So the first is, I build my ideal wildcard team and I think, how different is that to the team I've currently got? So I'd advise you to go ahead, build the ideal wildcard team if you were to wildcard for game week 5, and then compare it side by side with your current team. And there's a few things you can compare. Number one is, how many changes are you making? So if you build your ideal team and you're changing 4 players, for me, that's not wildcard worthy. You can probably get away with changing 2 this week for a -4, or potentially just doing 1 over the next coming weeks. And like, you won't have the ideal team every week, because if you wildcard now, your team probably won't look like perfect for game week 10. So you can't always have the perfect team. So think about how many changes you would make on your ideal wildcard team and think about how different your ideal team is. And again, are they luxury transfers? Like, if in your ideal team you'd have Jota instead of Greenwood, like, is that a big enough difference to warrant not only a transfer, but the activation of the wildcard? If it's a restructuring of your team, perhaps you're getting in Ronaldo or Lukaku, can you just do that with a -4 and take out like Bruno and Ings? Is it possible to do what you need to do without the wildcard, would be my first question that I always ask myself. The second is, do you need to make all of the transfers this week? Yes, there are likes like Bamford and Jimenez, Ronaldo that you're going to want in very soon. Lukaku, James in game week 6, 7, 8. However, do you need to make them all this week? As I said, your team's never going to be perfect every single week. And you can get away with playing like Ings against Everton this week, or like Gilmore could come in against Watford for just 1 week. Like, it doesn't matter if in the odd week you've got 1 or 2 players with tough fixtures or that are just not, that's just like subpar players. So I would be thinking about, do I need to wildcard this week? Do I need to be making those transfers? Because I try and use my wildcard when it's absolutely optimal rather than just, oh, my team doesn't look this great this week, I'm going to play it. The next question I ask myself is, am I doing something like strengthening the bench as well? Because if I'm just making like 2 or 3 changes to my starting 11, I can get away with just taking a -4, potentially a -8. But if you're making 3 or 4 changes to your starting 11 and your bench is really weak and like you've got like Manquillo or someone that doesn't play and you want to bring in like Williams and Livramento and Duffy and you want to bring in those cheap players that you know are going to start, then you're starting to look at something that might be worth it. Because again, if you're making 3 changes to your starting 11 and then 4 or 5 changes, and then like three or 4 changes to your bench as well, then you're looking at 7 or 8 players you're potentially changing. So if your bench is very weak and you're upgrading that as part of the wildcard, I think that might make me lean towards doing it as well. And then the last one is, does it help with captaincy? Most of us will probably own Mo Salah, and I would argue that Mo Salah is one of the best captaincy options for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So if you're wildcarding to bring in Ronaldo, Lukaku and Salah, like, are you going to captain all 3 of those? I mean, and we'll get onto that discussion in a minute about a 3 premium wildcard draft. For me, if I'm going with a premium, it's because I want to captain them. And I don't see you captaining all 3 premiums in the coming weeks. So bear that in mind as well. Is it the best use of your money? Would it be better going for someone like Bamford or Jimenez over Lukaku until you could potentially captain him? So again, it's very difficult to advise you for your independent teams. But for me, these are the things that I'm thinking about when I decide, should I wildcard this week? So assuming you are still wildcarding or you're looking at wildcarding soon, the next sort of series of questions were, can you give us some advice if we are wildcarding? What should we be looking at? What should we be thinking about when we're wildcarding? So if you watch my wildcard game week 4 guide, you'll notice that this slide is very similar. These are the same 7 tips that I advised then. Just for those of you that have, I'll briefly go through these, but these are the 7 things that once I've decided I am wildcarding that I think about very carefully. The first is, be aware of team value. So, for example, things like if you've got a player that you've got money tied up in, such as Ben Rama and Antonio, and you sell them on your wildcard, but then you decide you want them back, you'll lose that money you've got tied up in them and you'll have to buy them at full price. So be very careful about that sort of thing. Try and buy players that you think will go up twice in price. You can then sell them for £0.1 million profit. So all of these things, don't just start randomly picking, activate your wildcard and just chucking in players, bringing them out, taking them in, because you've got to think about what price you bought players for, how you can try and increase your team value across the week when you play your wildcard. So try and be aware as possible of team value. The second thing is be aware of price points and flexibility. It's like there are certain players, for example, Damari Gray, who I think is a great option, and you might think, oh, like Dennis is a great option as a third striker. The issue with players like specifically like Dennis is if Dennis doesn't perform, maybe he gets dropped, maybe he gets injured, how are you going to replace him? Because at 5.2 million, there are no other good strikers. So I think the nearest is probably Pookie. So unless you're leaving 0.7 in the bank to replace Dennis as part of your starting 11, you've probably got to make at least 2 transfers. So as well as picking players that look appealing currently right now, think, if I pick that player, are there other options at that price point? So a really nice option is if you pick Sarr or Traore on your wildcard, you've got Sarr, Traore, Willock, you've got Saka just a little bit more, Ben Rama just a little bit more, Gray, Gallagher. You've got so many options around that price point. So that's a really nice price point to have in your team. And equally, if you don't have someone like Jota or Greenwood in your team or Grealish, how are you going to be able to get to those 7.5, 8 million pound midfielders if you don't have that price point in your team? So as well as actual players, I'd be aware of picking players that are at specific price points so it gives you ultimate flexibility. The third thing is include at least a few long-term keeps. You could be playing your second wildcard in like game week 33, game week 35 if there's a double game week. That means you might have to keep your current team for like 30 plus game weeks. So yes, you want to pick players with really appealing upcoming fixtures, and of course you have free transfers every week. Like you have one free transfer, you can build those up, you can play these mini wildcards by taking -4s. That's absolutely fine. But you don't want to just pick players with nice fixtures over the next few, because by game week 14 you don't want your entire team to look terrible. So pick a few players like Rafinha, I think is a great option. I think Late Riser Prenil calls them like glue guys. So pick these players that will glue your team together and you can hold them no matter what. Bamford, Jimenez, Rafinha, these really nicely priced players that you can hold long term, and they're basically fixture proof. Link into that, try and pick some nailed players because you've got no wildcard to save you. I often see people say, I'll choose Jota and Greenwood because I've got my wildcard in my back pocket. And if all of these players suddenly get dropped, I can pick them. Activate my wildcard. The issue, if you activate your wildcard now, is you've got no wildcard to save you. So if you're picking Torres, Greenwood, Jota, and you've got a really, really weak bench with only £4 million defenders, what are you going to do if a lot of those players get dropped? How are you going to get out of that, especially if they're at difficult price points? So I would try and pick like 80% nail players and then just take a few risks in your wildcard team. Tip 5 is to have a strong enough bench that isn't going to cause you issues. Sort of link into tip 3 and 4 again. I'm not saying you should have like a £7 million midfielder on your bench, but I think if you've got the choice between, I don't know, someone like, well, it's a difficult one, but I wouldn't try and have £4.5 million forwards because they're just dead spots. I think if you can, try and have maybe like Duffy and Williams on your bench as like really good enablers because you know they're likely to start. But I wouldn't go like full cheap on my bench, like a £4.5 million forward. I wouldn't go for like Omabamidele and then like Williams because you know that like the Norwich defenders have the potential to be dropped, and you also know that that £4.5 million striker is a dead spot. So I would do everything you can to make your bench cheap, but if you can, just upgrade a couple of them so that you know you can rely on your bench if some of your starting 11 miss out. Tip 6 is to be aware of future fixture swings. If you're playing your wildcard now, you have to be aware that there's a fixture swing in game week 7 or game week 8. And you have to be aware that there's a fixture swing in game week 15. And there are a couple of others as well. How are you going to get to triple Chelsea or at least double Chelsea in game week 8? It is obviously possible. It's really easy. If you've got Ronaldo and Luke Shaw, you can just go to James and Lukaku in game week 8. But be aware of these fixture swings. Look all the way up to like game week 20 and think, is there a way I can start building to that over the coming weeks? I know that seems really advanced, but you've got to realize that a lot of people will be saving their wild card till game week 15. So you need to think about your team structure, again, price points, etc., and how you're going to be flexible enough to deal with that. And then tip 7 is do not be afraid of double ups and triple ups. There's a well-known psychological bias called diversification bias, which is our natural tendency as human beings to try and diversify and not put all of our eggs in one basket. We want to try and spread the risk. And in a lot of aspects of life, this is a really positive thing, but I think in FPL, it definitely hinders us. I don't want to go for double Wolves defence just in case they concede. If you think Wolves are most likely to keep a clean sheet over the coming weeks, go for Wolves double defence, because if they keep a clean sheet, you've got double the points that everyone else does. So don't be afraid of those double ups, especially in like attack. If you'd have gone for Ben Rama and Antonio from the start, okay, which I did, and I know a lot of managers did, you're laughing now. Double up in attack. People are like, no, just think, what if they don't score? Then I've got 2 players that have blanked. But if they do score, and they score a lot, you've got 2 players that have potentially hauled. So don't be afraid of those double ups and triple ups. I think you can be aggressive with it, but also be aware that if you go for a triple up and their fixtures become really difficult in a few weeks, you're like banking in like 3 or 4 transfers. So I would sort of avoid tripling up unless it's someone like Wolves or Leeds that have like a really nice extended run of nice fixtures. So those are the 7 tips that I have if you are wildcarding this week or in future weeks. They're the things that I'm thinking about when I'm wildcarding. Right, this is going to end up being an hour-long episode if I'm not careful. So I'm just going to show you the wildcard draft. And I got this a few times. Show us what your draft would look like if you were to wildcard this week. Again, I'm not going to talk about this in too much detail because I don't want this to just be about wildcards, this video. But this is my current draft. I think I'm 0.2 million off of this draft, but I don't have the best team value. So there's potential that you guys could easily afford this. If not, there are a few places you can downgrade. Firstly, I think Sarr is a great option. Jose Sarr in goal. I think Meslier is a great option. I just think that 0.5 goes a long way in defence, midfield and attack. And I think Sanchez is quite likely to keep clean sheets coming up. So he's not a great option, but I just don't know at the moment who I'd want in goal. In defence, I've gone pretty premium, actually. And like I said, I think you can get away with like Duffy, Livramento, Williams as well. But I think if you go for too many of those and they start getting dropped, you're relying on 3 defenders every week rather than being able to choose from the 5. So I think Cancelo and Rudiger are those long-term options. I don't think over the coming weeks, Cancelo and Rudiger's fixtures are that great, but they're both fairly nailed in their teams. They're both playing for teams with the best defences in the league, and their fixtures do start to swing around 7, 8, 9. And like I said, if people are wildcarding then and you're not, you don't want to be waiting till then to get in all these players. Trent's a staple in every single team I make. Like, you can go without him, but it's just not worth it for me. I think he's averaging 8.5 points per game so far, which is mental. So for me, Trent would be in every draft. Williams is my budget enabler just because I like Norwich's fixtures over the next few, and he's 4 million, whereas Duffy and Livramento are slightly more expensive. Marcal, I really like the Wolves defence. Obviously, you could go for Jose Sarr and Marcal, or you could go for Semedo. We're going to discuss Marcal and Semedo in a minute. I just like him because of his price. I think he's gone up to 4.6 million potentially since making this video, so might be a little bit more difficult to get him in. This is somewhere you could downgrade, though. You could go to like Livramento or Duffy, because most weeks you're probably just going to start Cancelo, Trent and Rudiger anyway. Midfield-wise, I'm going for a 3-4-3 here, by the way, just to make that clear. Midfield-wise, Rafinha, Salah, Jota and Gray. I mean, they sort of pick themselves, I suppose. Rafinha's long-term fixtures are fantastic. I think he's probably the best value over the coming weeks. Salah's a no-brainer for me, captaincy most weeks, and I think he can return against anyone. Jota's one of those, I said like you can pick like 1 or 2 risks. Jota's one of those risks for me, alongside maybe Cancelo because of his rotation risk. Jota, I just think when he plays, his upside is so high. If Mane actually turned up in the last game, then Jota could have easily got 3 or 4 assists and maybe a goal or 2 as well. So I really like Jota at his price. And then Gray's that budget enabler. It could be Gray. It could be El Yunusi. We're going to discuss budget midfielders in a minute. There are so many good budget midfielders. So you can take your pick there. And then the front 3, I just think is so nice. This would be what would make me lean towards a wildcard this week. Bamford, Jimenez and Ronaldo is just such a good front 3. I personally wouldn't be going for Lukaku, Ronaldo and Salah because it means you've got to do one of a few things. You've got to play a 4-3-3 with 2 £4.5 million forwards. Midfielders, sorry, which I'm just not keen on. Or you've got to play a 3-5-2, which means you only have Ronaldo and Lukaku, which means you don't get Jimenez, Bamford, Calvert-Lewin, Antonio, Wilson, all of these good budget, sort of mid-priced strikers. So for me, 3-4-3 is the optimal formation. I really like this draft. I think it's a nice spread of balance. Like I said, if you're priced out of this, if you're like 0.3 million short or whatever, you could downgrade Gray, you could downgrade Marcal, you could potentially downgrade Jimenez to like Armstrong or Pookie and you get even more money. Or potentially, probably the safer one is to just do like Cancelo to Reece James or Cancelo to Luke Shaw. But I really like this draft. This would be roughly what I'd be going with if I was wildcarding for Game Week 5. So wildcard discussion out the way. Hope you're still with me. So now we've done the wildcard discussion, we're going to work from back to front with all of the questions I got. So we're going to go through the questions from defenders, questions for the midfield spot, and then questions for the forwards, which is obviously revolving around Antonio and DCL. The main question that I received for the defenders is, should we be going for Fernando Marçal or Nelson Semedo? I think a lot of people are looking to get on their nice Wolves fixtures. Wolves have got really good underlying data for the first few, considering it as well that they've had quite tough fixtures. So I think a lot of people are using their free transfer this week on Marçal or Semedo, or potentially, as I just discussed in the wildcard draft, that final wildcard spot in the defence is going to one of the two. So I don't think this is very straightforward, but I think now that Marcal has gone up 0.1 million last night, it makes the discussion a little bit easier for me. My stance on this from the start has always been that Semedo is the better option in my opinion, but potentially not like 0.4 or 0.5 million pound better than Marcal. I think if you can use the funds elsewhere, Marcal might be able to match him. Now, Marcel's gone up to 4.6. So there's only a 0.3 million pound difference. If they were the same price, I'd just say Semedo in my opinion. The issue with Semedo is that he is very well known, especially at Barcelona, for having a terrible end product. His expected goal involvement's always incredibly high for a fullback. He gets forward so well. He actually defends pretty well at points as well, but he's very well known for his attacking threat. But he just doesn't ever seem to deliver on that. I don't know if it's a combination of variance, bad luck, or just poor finishing and poor end product. But if we take a look at their underlying statistics and their heat map-wise, I think both are very attacking fullbacks. What I would note is clearly a big difference between the two, which we'll get through into the underlying stats. If you look at the heat maps, is there are some touches in the box for Nelson Semedo. Marcal is quite a wide fullback. Nelson Semedo makes those sort of inverted runs sometimes, and it ends up getting in the box quite a lot. Total minutes played, they're all playing 90 minutes. Obviously, Semedo missed the first game. So other than that, I think they're 90-minute men. Obviously, Marcal was a bit of a rotation threat at left back, and Semedo is a little bit at right back with Hoover. But I think both players are probably fairly nailed to start. I think Semedo, if I had to choose, I think Semedo's the slightly more nailed of the two. And also Marcal does suffer from injuries quite a lot. So there is that slight worry with Marcal. That being said, projected points-wise, the fixed algorithm has them very, very, very close. Semedo, 23.7 points over the next 6 game weeks. Marcal, 22.8. So the fixed algorithm predicts them to do pretty similarly over the next few, in which case you probably go for Marcal because he's cheaper. Expected FPL points from the first 4 game weeks per 90. So this is combining all metrics into how many points they're expected to get per 90. Semedo wins at 6.03, Marcal at 5.64. Again, not a lot to separate the two of them. Where it starts to become a clear difference between the two is the rest of the underlying data. So non-penalty expected goals and expected assists per 90 for Semedo, 0.31, which is sort of approaching what you expect from like midfielders. That's the same as Damari Gray. So Semedo's getting a lot of opportunities to score an assist. Fernando Marcal is 0.15, so half of that. And he obviously got the 2 FPL assists in game week 4. But I think Semedo's attacking returns are probably more sustainable, the positions that he's finding himself in. Big chances, 0.67 per 90 for Semedo, 0.25 for Marcal. If you watched the Wolves-Watford game from game week 4, Semedo had 2 one-on-ones. He got into the box and shot twice, 2 one-on-ones, and the keeper saved both of them. So again, starting to play into that narrative that he's a poor end product. But I'd rather a defender with a poor end product that's getting into the box regularly, because variance and just likelihood that they'll eventually score will come into play. So for me, I'm still favouring Semedo there. And touches in the box, Marcal 0.75 per 90. Nelson Semedo 3.67, which again is so high for a fullback. That's better than some strikers. So for me, it's Semedo is the option. If I'm being asked and if I'm being put on the spot, I would still say Semedo. But if that 0.3 million allows you to get up to like Jimenez or Bamford, or it allows you to upgrade like Torres to Jota, for example, like if that money goes a long way, I don't have any issue with you picking Marcal, especially if you brought him in on your wildcard at 4.5 million. Just keep him. That's absolutely fine. So for me, it is very close, but I would be going for Nelson Semedo if I had the choice. So the most common question for the midfielders was, who should we be replacing Benrahma with, or who are the best budget midfielders? I would start by saying that the more I look into this, the more I think Benrahma is the best budget midfielder, and that I might just end up holding Benrahma. Even with Man United in game week 5, even with Antonio suspended, and even with the Europa League coming up, I do wonder whether just for the time being, whilst we collect a little bit more data, Benrahma might be worth holding. But we will discuss that a bit later in the video. For this one, assuming you are going to replace Benrahma, these are the best options from £5.5 million to £6.5 million, in my opinion. If you can stretch up to the likes of Torres, Greenwood and Jota, it might be worth it. But I've assumed for most of you, it's just going to be a straight swap. So I've just gone for players around that price point. So what I've got is I've got the underlying statistics for each of the players, the 3 things that I would prioritize. Obviously, I look for more than just these 3 things, but for the purpose of this graphic, I can only fit so much on the screen. So I've gone for the 3 things that I would prioritize, which is expected FPL points per 90, which is a metric that combines absolutely everything. Expected goals and expected assists per 90, which is, again, is expected goal involvement per 90, and touches in the box. Because I think if they're getting a lot of touch in the box, even if they're not getting shots off, eventually that sort of variance, if they're getting enough touch in the box, they'll get assists, they'll get goals, they'll get the opportunity to shoot. So I like touches in the box as well. And then I've got their fixtures for the next 5 game weeks. With respect to the color scheme, you can see some of the boxes in the underlying statistics are orange and some are white. The orange boxes means that that statistic is better than Ben Rama's. So, for example, El Yunusi's 6.56 expected FPL points per 90 is better than Ben Rama's. If the box is white, it means it is not better than Ben Rama's. So, as you can see here, a lot of these players' underlying statistics just aren't as good as Ben Rama's. The only two players whose underlying statistics stick out as being better than Ben Rama's in these three metrics is El Yunusi and Conor Gallagher. Now, Conor Gallagher is someone that has stood out for a few weeks now. He's getting attacking returns. His underlying statistics are arguably some of the best in the league. 1.08 expected goal involvement per 90 is absolutely brilliant. So I think Gallagher, he's not going under the radar, but he could be a great option. El Yunusi is definitely going under the radar. 0.1% ownership. Started both of the last games. I think he played 90 minutes in both. That could be incorrect. But I think he's played his way into that Southampton starting 11. And his underlying statistics are better than Ben Rama's in all three categories. 6.56 expected FPL points, 0.77 expected goal involvement, and 5.5 touches in the box is really, really nice. So I think El Yunusi would be my differential shout for the coming weeks. Now, the reason that this is annoying is that the two best players with respect to underlying statistics probably have the two worst fixtures of all the choices. It seems strange to bring in El Yunusi and Gallagher before Man City away and Liverpool away. What I would say is if you're looking for a long-term hold or potentially you're on Wildcard and you just want a fourth midfielder that you can just hold for ages or a fifth midfielder that you can sit on the bench, I think Gallagher and El Yunusi are arguably the two best options. You just got to put up with the fact that their next three fixtures for both aren't very good. Outside of that, I know people wanted me to compare Townsend, Doucouré and Gray. I personally don't think Townsend, his underlying statistics aren't that fantastic. I think he's probably the biggest rotation risk of the three. I think if it was me, I'd probably pay a little bit more for Doucouré and Gray. There's not a ton to separate the two. Their expected goal involvement is identical. Their expected FPL points is almost identical. The one thing that I like about Gray in comparison to Doucouré is he gets into the box a little bit more. Now, he is completely outperforming his expected goal involvement per 90. I think he's got 100% shot on target to conversion rate. So he's scoring every shot he has on target, which obviously isn't sustainable. But the fact that he's getting into the box more and the fact that he's a slightly more attacking asset, I think I would just about prefer Gray. But obviously, if you can't afford Gray, Doucouré is a great option as well. Outside of that, Harrison's underlying statistics have been absolutely terrible this year. So whilst it might be tempting to jump on a Leeds player, and if you brought in Harrison, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. I'd be potentially looking at more like a triple up of like Ayling, Rafinha and Bamford myself. But if you haven't got a forward spot and you want another lead player, I think Harrison might be fine. Another thing to just keep in mind is that he might see some rotation now that they've signed Dan James, which could put you off slightly as well. Traoré is probably the third best player in this list for underlying statistics to compete with Ben Rama. You can see he beats Ben Rama and everything apart from expected FPL points. His underlying data is fantastic. The 8.02 touches in the box per 90 is better than most strikers. I think it's one of the best in the league. Probably Salah's the only one that's definitely beaten that. Lukaku as well, I think. And the fixtures are amazing. So again, as I said last week in a couple of my videos, if you trust underlying data, by all means go for it. But he's continuing to struggle to get attacking returns. So I think when he does, he might eventually haul. He's the sort of player that you could just easily see just scoring a hat-trick and getting all of his goals in one game. But for me, I think I want to see a little bit more from his end product first. Sarr has been really disappointing since that first half against Aston Villa when he killed Matty Target. Other than that, I think he's really, really struggled. And he's 5.7 touches in the box per 90. Again, is massively skewed by that game week 1 when he had 12 touches in the box. So I really, really like Sarr's next two fixtures against Norwich and Newcastle. So for me, it would be a massive punt to bring him in, but I do like it considering he's probably on penalties as well. I would not be shocked if he got 2 or 3 goals from those two fixtures. But Watford's fixtures don't continue to be like fantastic for the long term. So if you're getting in Sarr, it's probably a 4 or 5 week punt at most. And then Rafinha, who in my opinion, despite whatever the underlying statistics say, I think Rafinha is the best option. He's still on a lot of set pieces. When he does play, even against difficult opposition, he always looks like he could possibly score. He was unlucky not to score against Liverpool. Could have got a couple of assists as well. I think Rafinha is probably the best replacement for Ben Rama if you don't have him already. The statistics are absolutely fantastic. He's nailed. I think he is someone that will continue to improve as well. I'm a little bit biased because I love Rafinha, but for me, if you don't have Rafinha in and you have the money in the bank to go from Ben Rama to Rafinha, I would do that. So that's my opinion on the best replacements for Ben Rama. I'll probably be holding Ben Rama this week, probably, but I'm not definitely set on doing that. I could quite easily bring in the likes of Gray, Traoré, or Sarr, even El Yunusi potentially. But for me, I think Ben Rama could be a hold. But these are the options that I think you should be looking at replacing Ben Rama with. So, of course, the forward discussion this week was mainly focused around Antonio and DCL. So that's what I'm focusing around. I'm going to go through what's to do with Antonio, what's to do with DCL. And then I've got a little bit of a discussion about who I think personally you should be replacing Antonio and DCL with. So the first thing to note for Antonio, very different situation to DCL, is how strong is your bench for game week 5? Because I think if your bench is strong enough to cover Antonio for game week 5, I don't think there's necessarily a reason to transfer him out. And I will preface this by saying that I am probably going to keep Antonio, so I might be slightly biased towards that method. But the reason for that is I think he could quite easily haul in game week 6 and 7 against Leeds and Brentford. His underlying statistics when he plays are the best in the league. He's got the best expected goal involvement in the league this season. If he wasn't suspended, I don't think there's any way, even if against Manchester United, there's no way we'd be considering taking him out. And did we expect that much against Manchester United anyway? I don't think just one game of suspension is enough for me to think, all right, I don't want Antonio anymore. And the issue with Antonio is we've probably got a lot of money tied up in him. So if you take him out, you've then got to bring him back in at 7.9 or 8 million or whatever he is when you decide you want him back in. So for me, I think if you've got a strong enough bench, such as Luke Ayling, Brandon Williams, to come in for Antonio, I think it might personally be worth it. The second thing you've got to consider is it a transfer for free or is it a hit? If it's for a hit, you would need your replacement to outscore Antonio by 4 points plus your bench player's points. So say your bench player does really poorly and only scores 2 points. Obviously, if you bring in Bamford from -4, you've lost 4 points there and your bench player would have got 2 points. That's 6 points. So what you need to ask yourself is, do you think Bamford over the next 3 weeks will outscore Antonio by 6 points in game week 5? So do you think he'll get an attacking return in game week 5? And then do you think he'll outscore him in 6 and 7? For me, I'm not sure. And that's assuming your bench player only gets 2 points. If you've got like a Luke Ayling again or a Brandon Williams that can come in and get a clean sheet, you need Bamford or Jimenez, whoever you bring in, to get 8 points to make that hit worth it. And then you're just only breaking even. After that, you've then got to consider that you've then got Bamford or Jimenez going up against Antonio in 6 and 7. So for me, you've got to be very, very confident that the player's going to do well over game weeks 5, 6, and 7, but game week 5 in particular to make that hit worth it. If it's for free, I think it might make slightly more sense because all you need is one attacking return in game week 5 and then him to match or do better than Antonio in 6 and 7. But I do think whether it's for a hit or for free is definitely something that would play into my mind here. And the third thing is, do you think the Europa League will have a big impact on Antonio's minutes? If the answer is yes, and you think it's going to cause some rotation or rest in the Premier League, then it's absolutely worth taking Antonio out. Because if you think he's going to miss game week 5 because of suspension, and then he might get rotated or rested in 6, 7, or 8, then it's probably not worth keeping him anyway, because he's going to end up playing like potentially like 100 or 120 minutes less than Bamford and Jimenez. So that's my personal opinion of it. I don't think the UEL, the Europa League, will affect Antonio's minutes that much. I think he's more likely to be rotated and rested in the Europa League, and he's more likely to play more minutes in the Prem. So for me, I'm currently leaning towards keeping Antonio on the bench and having one of my cheap defenders in Luke Ayling or Brandon Williams coming into the team. But these are the three things that I would be thinking about when deciding should you take Antonio out of your team. So Calvert-Lewin, again, is a very, very different discussion to Antonio. Obviously, Calvert-Lewin, Rafa Benitez has said that he's out for potentially like 3 or 4 weeks and he's still suffering with the issue with the broken toe and the quadriceps. So for me, Calvert-Lewin is probably more of a priority. I've been asked, if you own Antonio and DCL, who would you prioritise? I'd prioritise removing Calvert-Lewin first. Antonio, we know, is only 1 game, unless he picks up another injury. But for the time being, we know Antonio is 1 game. He'll be back in game week 6. For Calvert-Lewin, he could be gone for 5, 6 game weeks. We just don't know. The first thing I would say is definitely, even if you think you might lose 0.1 million, I would personally wait for the pressers, because you just never know. Players have made freak recoveries before. It might be that Rafa Benitez says he's making really good progress, because he has been very, very explicit in the past in some of his press conferences. Obviously, some managers are slightly better, and he was very, very annoying and elusive in the press conference for Game Week 4. He made it sound like Calvert-Lewin was fine, so it might be that you don't trust him in the press conferences, but he could say something along the lines of he's making great progress and he should be back for next week. In that case, you might want to keep him because the fixtures coming up are just so good. I do think he'll probably miss Game Week 5, having heard what I've heard from the different sources, but I would still wait for the press conferences on Thursday. The second thing, similar to Antonio, is it for a hit or is it for free? Now, I know you don't want to bench him because he might not be back for next week anyway, but I've been asked by a lot of people, some people have said, I've already taken a -4. Should I take another -4 to remove DCL? My opinion on that is probably no. I'll probably wait till next week and do it for free. If you haven't taken a hit yet, you haven't used your free transfers, and you want to take DCL out as part of a -4, maybe you do like DCL and Bruno to Jota and Ronaldo or something like that, then in my opinion, that might be some hit you want to take. I think that's a hit that might be worth it. But if it's for an extra -4, if you've already taken a -4 and this is to become a -8, or you've taken a -8 and it's for a -12, that's the sort of hit that I don't think is worth it. So consider that, absolutely. I think if it's part of an extra -4, probably not. If it's part of your first -4, then it might be worth it. And the second thing is, would you rather roll your transfer next week to bring in Ron or Rom for free? If you've only got one free transfer this week, but you roll till next week, you could potentially bring in like Romelu Lukaku and Mason Mount ahead of like game week 7 for free. So think about if you did roll your transfer and you covered Calvert-Lewin with your bench in a similar way to how I said with Luke Ayling and Brandon Williams. If you do that, is that the better optimal strategy for your team? Would that allow you to get Romelu Lukaku in, etc., Ronaldo next week? So I think rolling a transfer is definitely a brilliant tactic in FPL and sometimes underappreciated, because with 2 free transfers, you can not only bring in the players you want, but you can have a slight restructure of your team. So for me, I think if I owned Calvert-Lewin after saying all of that, and I would probably replace him with Bamford or Jimenez, as we're going to discuss in a minute. But I don't think there's any issue if you can cover it with your bench and you don't also own Antonio. I think if you own both, you've probably got to get rid of Calvert-Lewin. But if you only own Calvert-Lewin, I think it might be potentially worth benching him, having another week of information, and then using your bench. But it's completely up to you guys. That's just my personal opinion on the matter. So after explaining what I would do in those scenarios, I assume that a lot of you will be probably taking one or both out and you're looking for the best replacements. What I will do is I'm just going to link a video directly above, which is, it will be in like the cards above. I did a video for Fantasy Football Fix, which was also released today, this morning, and it was on the best replacements for Antonio and DCL, and I did an entire video on it, and the 6 players I covered were Bamford and Jimenez, Neil Maupay, Alan St. Maximan, Armstrong and Pookie. So I covered all 6 of those at different price points, because I think for a lot of us, we won't necessarily want to make a direct replacement. Perhaps we want to downgrade and use the funds elsewhere. So I covered those 6 players. But for me, my general consensus on it is, despite having said all that and despite doing that video, I personally think that Bamford and Jimenez are the 2 best options to replace Calvert-Lewin or Antonio with. Now, I just want to preface this and start by saying that there is a potential Bamford injury, but in my opinion, it's absolutely nothing to worry about. There's a little clip from just before he did his interview. Obviously, the mic picked up a conversation he was having with someone else. I don't actually know who that person was that he was having the discussion with. But just before he started his interview there was on a podcast, he said, "My hamstring is pinging." So in football terms, to be honest, pinging normally isn't a big thing. It normally means it's like overstretched and you're just starting to like feel like a bit of a niggling in it. And he was holding his hamstring at the end of the game. I probably think he just overworked his hamstring. I don't necessarily think that he said it in quite an excitable manner as well. So I don't think the fact that he said my hamstring's pinging means that he's like torn his hamstring or that it's a particular issue. But what I would say is I'd definitely wait for Bielsa's press conference. He normally does it on the morning before the deadline. So it should be Thursday morning. I would wait for Bielsa's press conference before bringing in Bamford. But in my personal opinion, if I had to just say now, I think Bamford will be fit. Jimenez is obviously a great option as well for 0.5 million less. Fixtures-wise, the Fix algorithm, Fantasy Football Fix algorithm, and other algorithms as well, tend to favour the Leeds fixtures. And if you watch the FPL, they did a fantastic segment on this. And Big Man Marcal was saying how Leeds fixtures are significantly better over the next few from an attacking perspective, because all of the teams they play over the next 4 or 5 fixtures are in the bottom half of the table for XG conceded. So I think I do prefer Leeds fixtures over the next sort of 5 or 6. But what I would say is Wolves fixtures over the next 10, 15 games are amazing. Wolves fixture run extends well beyond Leeds. So again, if you're someone that's looking for like a long-term hold, you want someone that you can just keep in your team, you don't have to worry about transfers, Jimenez might be your guy. But I think if you want to attack the next few fixtures, as long as Bamford is fit, I think the fixtures are better for him. If we have to take a look at underlying statistics, we know that Jimenez is a 90-minute man. Bamford is pretty much a 90-minute man, but we know when he has issues with his hamstring or when there's a lot of fixtures coming up, he does sometimes get hooked early for Tyler Roberts and Rodrigo. I think with the introduction of Dan James as well, that might be another bit of rotation. Obviously, Dan James won't play up front, but there might be a bit more rotation in that forward 4. That being said, I think both players are fairly nailed. Both players are also on penalties. As far as we know, Bamford's still on penalties. Jimenez is definitely still on pens, so that's obviously a good thing as well. Projected points-wise, Bamford is massively favoured by the Fix algorithm. I would say that the reason for that is probably the fixtures, because the underlying data for the 2 is relatively similar. So it's probably the fixtures that has led to that. But again, if you trust the algorithm and you just want to trust the statistics, then Bamford does look like the better option there. Expected FPL points from the first 4 game weeks, Bamford just comes out on top, but neither player has got particularly impressive underlying stats from the first few. That being said, the fixtures have been really difficult for the two. Leeds played against Manchester United and Liverpool. Wolves obviously had Leicester, Spurs and Manchester United. So they've both had really tough fixtures in the first 4. So I don't think that would necessarily put me off. And their non-penalty expected goals and expected assists per 90 are really, really impressive. Jimenez 0.48 just trumps the 0.41 of Bamford. What I would say is that the majority of that XG plus XA is made up from expected assists for Jimenez. So Jimenez is more of a creative threat. He's dropping a little bit deeper and trying to link up play and like slide in Traore and Trincao. Whereas Bamford is more of a direct goal threat. And again, strikers get more bonus points and more outright points for goals. So that would slightly favour Bamford, but obviously assists are great as well. If a player can get a goal and an assist, then that's fantastic. I think where Bamford comes into his own is the 0.52 big chances per 90 in comparison to Jimenez's 0.25. So Bamford's getting more sort of clear-cut opportunities. Again, it's quite a small sample size, but I think we know this anyway. Bamford gets into a lot of like easy opportunities to score. His movement's fantastic. Whereas Jimenez, because he's dropping deep and he's got Traore and Trincao running around him, I think he's getting less of those clear-cut opportunities. And then just touches in the box are both very impressive for the two of them. They're both getting a lot of touch in the box. For me, it's almost a 50-50 choice. I think if money is absolutely no issue and we have it guaranteed that Bamford is fit, I think Bamford's the better option in my opinion, just because of those fixtures. However, if you don't have the funds for Bamford or you just want to take a bit of a risk with a lower owned player, I genuinely love Jimenez. If I was on Wildcard, as I showed you at the start, I would have both. I think Bamford and Jimenez are up there with two of the best strikers over the next few game weeks. So that's my opinion on the two. If I was replacing Calvert-Lewin, I'd be going for Bamford number 1, Jimenez number 2. Cool. If that wasn't enough, we've got a few other questions that I just got asked that I did want to cover as well. I hope you're still with me and I hope you're still enjoying this video. I know it's going to be absolutely massive long video. I don't know the total length yet, but I hope you are enjoying this video. This is obviously in place of my live stream, so normally I'd just be answering these questions live. But anyway, these are some other questions that I were asked that I thought would be useful for everyone interested. The first thing is it worth holding Ings with so much uncertainty around potentially Bamford's injury, Antonio's ban, what's happening with Calvert-Lewin? Do we want to bring in both Ronaldo and Lukaku? There's a lot of uncertainty in those forward spots, and a lot of us have just held on to Ings because of that. And I'm one of those people. I've still got Danny Ings in my team. And the answer to that is I think yes. I think I will probably be holding Ings. And the reason for that is similar to what I've been saying about taking out Antonio and DCL as part of the hit. Do you really think it's worth using a transfer to bring out Ings when he's got Everton this week? Could you see Danny Ings scoring against Everton? Absolutely. I don't think Everton have looked that great at the back, and he's on penalties when El Ghazi isn't on the pitch. He's a fantastic striker that will take his chance. I wouldn't be surprised to see Ings score against Everton, and I think another week of data to find out definitely about Bamford, to see whether Jimenez can find some form, to see whether Calvert-Lewin's injury is long-term. I think it's worth it. So if you have Ings this week, I'd just roll your transfer or use your transfer elsewhere. I don't think it's worth taking Ings out. So to the 3 or 4 people that asked that question, yes, I think it's worth it, and I'll probably be holding Ings myself. The next question, which we sort of touched upon already, is should we be worried about West Ham assets with the Europa League? I don't think we should be worried, and I don't think we should take out players because we think they're going to be used in the Europa League. And also, just because players are used in the Europa League doesn't mean they can't then play in the Prem. Like, these players are professional athletes. They can play season long, play midweek as well. It happens in the Championship all year round. So I don't necessarily think this is something that you should be overly worried about. What I would say is definitely keep an eye on it. Right? If Benrahma plays 90 minutes in the Europa League and Vlasic plays nothing and Fornals is rotate, and like Bowen and Fornals are sat on the bench, to me that suggests that potentially we could see Benrahma rotate in the Prem. So keep an eye on the Europa League, but I don't think you take out players before or like make it like the main purpose of what you're doing with your team. So for me, just keep an eye on it. The next question, again linking to West Ham as well as a lot of questions around West Ham, is should we potentially be considering playing Williams, Luke Ayling, etc. ahead of Benrahma? So I said, obviously, if you've got Antonio or DCL, you could bench those and bring in Ayling and Williams. I'm not sure for me that I would want to play Williams and Ayling ahead of Benrahma. Williams and Ayling in particular, those cheap players, maybe Omar Barandelli as well, these sort of players don't have massive attacking threat, and they sometimes pick up on bonus, but they're also not that high on bonus either. So what you're saying is Williams and Ayling are probably a ceiling of 6 or 7. Obviously, they could get a freak goal, as we know. Do you think that Benrahma could outscore Williams and Ayling of 6 points? I think personally, yes. Like, Manchester United are definitely very susceptible to mistakes at the back, as we saw in the Champions League as well. They can concede against anyone. I think Benrahma's underlying stats have been great. Even without Antonio, I still expect West Ham to get a couple of opportunities. Unless there's a defender with great upside and with a perfect fixture, with like great attacking potential, I normally favour the attacker. So in my team, I would be choosing between, do I start Brandon Williams / Luke Ayling or Ben Rama? So I have this same debate in my team, but for me, I think I tend to favour the attacker. So at the moment, again, I'll discuss this in my team selection video. At the moment, I think I would just prefer to start Ben Rama. If you're not sure, you could potentially take Ben Rama out. We discussed the mid-price sort of replacements for Ben Rama, but for me, I favour the attacker. And the next question was, is 3-4-3 still the optimal formation? Because I think it's been widely accepted that because of all the forward options, 3-4-3 is the best. What about 4-3-3? What about 3-5-2? I think if you're looking to fit in 3 premium options, Lukaku, Ronaldo and Salah, I think 4-3-3 is probably the optimal formation because you can get like Diaz, Rudiger, Trent, Salah, Ronaldo, Lukaku, and then like Gray, Jota. You can get a few like cheap midfielders. So I think if you're trying to fit 3 premiums, 4-3-3 is the best one. I don't like 3-5-2 myself because I still see so much value in those 3 forward options. Antonio's only out for a week. We don't know how long Calvert-Lewin's out. Bamford's probably fine. Jimenez is great. Wilson will be coming back soon. You've got St. Maximin, Maupay. You've got all of these options that I think are fantastic. Pookie, Armstrong at a cheaper price. I would want 3 forwards for probably the majority of this season at the moment. And I think the midfielders are significantly less appealing. As we discussed with the mid-price replacements for Benrahma, I just don't like any of them that much particularly. So for me, I still think 3 up front is the optimal formation. Therefore, I like 3-4-3. But if you're looking to fit in 3 premiums, I like 4-3-3 as well. The other questions were all revolving around captaincy, but as per every week, if you know me on this channel, I do the captaincy debate as part of my team selection video. So for those of you that are looking to find out about captaincy, my video should be live tomorrow on my team selection, and I'll discuss captaincy within there. But for me, it's probably between Salah and Ronaldo, but we'll discuss in that video who I think is the optimal decision out of those 2. So guys, there you have it. That is the end of the game week preview Q&A style video. Do let me know what you think. I'll start making this a regular series, definitely at least until I get my live stream sorted and I can start taking your questions live. I just think this is a nice opportunity to make the content tailored to you guys. I don't want to cover things that you're not interested in. So do subscribe to the channel so that you get and also turn on notifications so that you know when I post asking for the questions, because if you are a subscriber to the channel and you have notifications on, you will know when I post on my community posts, and you'll know when I'm asking for these, and you can have your dilemmas answered in these videos. Also follow me on Twitter because I post a lot on there about that sort of stuff. Again, please do like, comment, subscribe. It's free for you guys and it helps the channel to grow massively by liking, commenting, and also subscribing to the channel. I'm enjoying making content so very much, and if you guys are too, please let me know below. I will catch you in probably tomorrow's video for my team selection, where I'll discuss what I'm planning to do in my transfers, and again, we will have that discussion around captaincy. But until next time, guys, thank you very much. Bye-bye.